Welcome to Darshili's journal article research presentation. That is me, Darshili. This is for the class Educational Psychology at Adams State University. The date is April 29th, 2026. My research revolved around formative assessment in K through 12 education, specifically the impact on student achievement and motivation. My research question specifically was, how does formative assessment impact student achievement and motivation in K through 12 classrooms? Dwight also wants to know. Why is this important? Well, this is super important stuff because it, for one, can improve student engagement, and we all need more engaged students. It can also guide instructional decisions, so we can adjust our instruction in real time based off of what we find in our formative assessments. This is something that I do constantly in my classroom right now. My first study was a meta-analysis from 2022. It covered over 48 studies across the globe. This was an international study and had a very large sample size because it is a meta-analysis of almost 120,000 students. In this meta-analysis, the researchers found a small positive effect. So it is statistically significant, but just barely. And they did find that the effect was stronger if you implement differentiation and get the students more involved. Of course, right? It sounds obvious. However, this study put it in writing. My second study was specifically on formative assessment in mathematics. This was a quasi-experimental design, so they're using circumstantial evidence in some cases. And in this one, they actually found no significant difference in using formative assessment versus a controlled group that did not use formative assessment. They did say that implementation varied and that in certain cases where implementation was more consistent, it did have a positive impact. But overall, this study found no significant difference statistically. And the second study that I looked at was a study from 2025. So this just happened on English as a foreign language students specifically, and it was all grounded in self-determination theory. And so they focused on increasing motivation and engagement and fostering autonomy in the students in this study, and they did find an increase in student achievement. This all was through supporting self-regulation and autonomy. They used social emotional learning practices. And so this one seemed like a no-brainer to me. I was not at all surprised reading the results of this study because, I mean, hey, if you can get the students engaged and if you can get them involved and take control over their own learning and foster that sense of autonomy, I have found, at least in my own students, that that is always going to help their performance. And so this study did find an increase in student achievement. I made a quick graph, pretty simple, rudimentary really. The math study found no significant difference. The first study that I looked at, the meta-analysis, did find one, and the one grounded in self-determination theory also found an even more statistical difference. So, overall results, the end results, formative assessment, good. The results were mixed, but they were generally positive, and they found that the effectiveness of formative assessment heavily depends on implementation strategies. So the more consistent across schools, grade levels, subjects, the more consistent it is in any given building across that building, the better results they found. And then, of course, that third study that I had looked at, at least the third one that I listed, found that motivation plays a key role in student achievement when using formative assessment. Some of the strengths of these three studies. The first one had a super large sample size, so that's great. The other two had large enough sample sizes to be totally valid. The second one, real classroom settings. So this was very good at getting real evidence that happened in real time in the classroom. And then There were also a bunch of different measures of outcome, especially in that third study. They used a bunch of different parameters to measure the outcome of student achievement and motivation. Some of the limitations. There was an inconsistent definition of what formative assessment really is. I found that while there is a general consensus of what formative assessment is, the actual definition that they were using did vary a little bit. So that's a little inconsistent. That was definitely a limitation. The implementation variability. So not all of these studies studied schools or teachers or students that were having these practices implemented consistently and effectively. And the big limitation of all three of these is that you can't really apply it to any specific scenario. There was a lack of generalizability. However, Michael Scott thinks that all those weaknesses were still strengths. So ultimately, is formative assessment helpful in student achievement and motivation? Is it effective? Yes, it is, but it is most effective when it is well implemented and when you're supporting the motivation and the autonomy of the students. The more involved they are and the more power they have over their own learning, the more effective formative assessment can be. This makes sense to me. This is something that I've found in my own classroom. If you can get the kids involved, if you can get them engaged, then using formative assessment checks like my warm-ups or exit tickets. I have short quizzes that I use on this program called Formative that gives me real-time data. I can graph it. I can make data-driven decisions on how I should adjust my instruction going forward next year if I need to go back and reteach things. So I do find that formative assessment is crucial in my teaching strategy. Some of the implications for us teachers is to focus on quality feedback. That was a common theme in all of these studies. The better the feedback and the more specific it is, the better. Also, use student-centered approaches. And so focusing on getting the students involved, adjusting instruction in real time, that's great. That is one of the biggest implications in my experience. And then also another takeaway is that if admin and school districts invest in teacher training and they're able to be consistent in the implementation of these formative assessment practices, we would see a significant difference, an even more significant difference. I know that at my school, not all teachers use the same practices. I know that I'm one of the few teachers that use warm-ups every single day and exit tickets every single day. I see some other teachers do use that, but it's not every day. And then, of course, with that teacher training, that will allow us to implement that consistently throughout the building, which all these studies found is going to have the biggest impact on student achievement and make it more effective. So that's collaboration. The more collaborative we can be, the more effective formative assessment can be. So the final takeaway, formative assessment is a useful tool for adjusting instruction in real time, and it is most effective when implemented consistently, along with fostering autonomy and student-centered learning. And that pretty much sums it up. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. This was a pretty fun project. I actually really enjoyed it. And while some of the findings weren't surprising to me, it's still a good reminder of how effective these formative assessment practices can be. So thank you so much.